our lunchtime speaker as well as our panel for the afternoon. It was clear from this morning these are issues that weigh very heavily on everyone here, including the folks who are now outside. And one of the goals here was to bring together folks who are doing research, important research, getting the data that is available when we can get it, and sharing it with each other. And that's our goal here today as well. So we're thrilled to have with us Amada Armenta. She's a doctoral candidate at the Department of Sociology at UCLA and a postdoc research fellow at the Comparative Center for Immigration Studies at UC San Diego. She has published prolifically for somebody working on their PhD, and her current research focuses on the politics and implementation of 287G in Nashville, Tennessee. So she's going to tell us about that for 20 minutes or so. We'll open it up for questions, and then we'll briefly let the panelists come up for the second page, and I'll introduce the second panel. So thank you so much.
Okay. All right, I'm setting my timer, so hopefully I can actually keep this to about 20 minutes. Since we've been talking about 287G all morning and we know what it is, I get to skip all of the normal background information and just jump right in. So this afternoon, I'm going to tell you about the 287G program in Davidson County, Tennessee. And this is my dissertation research. I lived in Nashville between November 2008 and September 2010. Nashville is an emerging immigrant destination. The Latino immigrant population, which is predominantly Mexican, started arriving in Nashville in the late 1990s and early 2000s during a construction boom. And population estimates from 2009 estimate that the Hispanic population makes up about 9% of all residents in Davidson County, which has a population of 635,000 people. So Nashville started their 287G program after a highly publicized case in the summer of 2006 in which an undocumented drunk driver got into an accident and killed 2 Tennessee residents. The reason that it ended up being so controversial is because the Davidson County Sheriff had a longstanding policy of sending information to the Law Enforcement Support Center. And through that process, several years even before 287G, ICE had issued 68 detainers to remove people who they deemed to be high priority. So after this man's information was sent to the Law Enforcement Support Center, ICE issued a detainer. When Davidson County, the Sheriff's Office found out that the man was without status, they were really upset and the public was outraged because he had been arrested and released from jail 14 times before he got in this accident. So, soon after that, it became a huge political issue locally, and the Nashville-Davidson County Sheriff, flanked by the police department chief on one side and the district attorney on the other side, announced that they would participate in 287G, and the sheriff at this press conference where all local politicians attended said, "It is important for us to emphasize that this program will affect only those illegal immigrants who have a blatant disregard for laws in Davidson County. So if you're in this country illegally and you commit a crime, we will process you under the federal authority given to us through 287G. So the Sheriff's Office signed their MOA in December of 2006. 15 Sheriff's Office employees received training, and the 287G program went live in April of 2007. Davidson County is a consolidated metro, which means that the county boundaries and the city boundaries overlap. In Davidson County, the police department arrests people. They don't have 287G. They don't have immigration enforcement authority, so they arrest people on state crimes. And then they're transferred to the Davidson County Sheriff's Office, where they're processed for screening upon booking. And all people who are foreign-born are processed. Their fingerprints are sent through IDENT and whatever federal databases, and then they're given an administrative interview. If the person is found to be removable, the deputized immigration officers issue the detainer and prepare the charging documents for removal. So the data that I'm going to present today comes from interviews and observations. So these included ride-alongs with patrol officers to understand how it is that people end up in custody, as well as interviews with upper-level police officials, and interviews with all of the deputized ICE officers in the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. And I also went to all of the meetings with the 287G Advisory Council. I don't know if you remember the original MOA said there should be an advisory council, so there was one in Davidson County. And while I lived there, I went through about 2 years of meetings as well as the normal ethnographic stuff, which is like hanging out at soccer games and festivals. So first, I'm going to try to give you information both about the police department and the sheriff's office, but I'm really going to give you information about what they say about the program, what they say their dilemmas are locally, because I think those are things that we don't hear very often. So the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department has 1,365 police officers responsible for policing 533 square miles. They come into contact with Latino immigrants in 3 ways. Sometimes people make calls for service or they're the victims of crime. They also come into contact through officer-initiated activities, traffic stops, Terry stop, etc. And they also come into contact through events that they plan themselves. So the Nashville Police Department has this program called El Protector, and I know I'm saying it wrong, but that's the way they say it. So the El Protector program, it's the public outreach program in the Davidson County Police Department, and they employ 2 full-time bilingual Latino officers who do outreach. They're on the radio, they're on TV shows, they plan these festivals, and so this flyer is a Hispanic community festival that they organize. They have all sorts of local partners. And this is just to give the message that actually the Nashville Police Department has been nationally recognized as engaging in some of the nation's best practices when it comes to immigrant outreach. And the department precinct commander says the communication is a bread and butter of police work. So there is some recognition that the department wants the cooperation of the Latino community, and they understand that they have to work to get it. So on the one hand, you've got a police department which has devoted substantial resources to Latino immigrant outreach, but despite their efforts, there is a feeling in the Latino immigrant community that they're being targeted, especially for traffic offenses. So why is that? So one reason is that the Nashville Police Department makes a lot of traffic stops. This is, I only have data until 2008, but as you can see, between 2003 and 2004, the number of traffic stops almost doubled. And the reason that is that in 2004, Nashville got a new police chief. They instituted something called the ComStat program, which values officer-initiated activity and traffic stops as a way to fight crime. This was before 287G. It really doesn't have anything to do with 287G. It was a change in the police department philosophy away from community policing and towards proactive policing with the idea that bad guys ride in cars, so we're going to stop the cars and we're going to find the bad guys. So, there's all of these traffic stops, so inevitably officers come into contact with Latino drivers who are no longer eligible for driver's license. And it's a controversial issue in the community. And so at a meeting with Hispanic business owners who were talking about the fact that their streets are lit up with with cop cars all the time, the precinct commander told them, "We want you to know that these enforcement efforts are based on crime data. We do location-based policing, not people-based policing. We hope with all these vehicle stops, they'll rob somewhere else. With these traffic stops, we're serving warrants left and right. We don't just turn our officers loose and tell them to make a difference where they think they can." But, despite this, the Nashville Police Department is a department that is deeply driven by statistics and officer-initiated activities. Officers are encouraged to be proactive, and they're reminded every day to make traffic stops between calls. The amount of activity that they produce in the form of stops, reports, and state citations and arrests partly determines the officer's days off, what shifts they get, and whether or not the officer gets their own patrol car. So what do officers say about this push towards CompStat, this push away from community policing, and the need to make stops? And they're not always happy about it. So this patrol officer, this was during a ride-along, he was talking about CompStat. He says, "To the lieutenants, there's no such thing as too many stops. The stats make them look good because they can say, look at all the work my guys are doing. I try to get in stops when I'm on my way to stuff, but you have to be careful because you don't want to be that guy who left your buddy hanging on a call because you want to pad your stats." So not all officers are pleased with the emphasis on traffic stops. They think it gets in the way of doing things like answering calls for service. Another officer with 19 years of experience says, the criteria for good job performance used to be how quick can you answer your calls? Do you answer your calls? That's community policing, and that's how you make people feel safe and satisfied. but now it's about stops. So many stops, people aren't available when the calls come out. So officers feel pressure to make traffic stops. This puts them in contact with Latino drivers in this particular precinct, and Latino drivers are no longer eligible for driver's licenses. So this is when the officer must decide what to do. When officers pull over a driver without a license, they have two choices. They can give the driver a misdemeanor state citation, or they can arrest them. A misdemeanor state citation is technically like a traffic arrest where the person has to go to court to remedy the problem, usually in the form of a fine. But the problem is that to qualify for a misdemeanor state citation, the officer has to be able to identify the person. And if the person doesn't have any ID, or if the officer is not willing to accept that person's ID, whatever they have is valid, then the officer is within their rights and authority to arrest them for driving without a license under the condition that that person doesn't qualify for a state citation. So the following information that I'm going to give you is just the things that officers say regarding whether they cite someone or arrest them for driving without a license during a traffic stops. So this officer says, well, if the Latino immigrant qualifies, usually I give them a misdemeanor state citation. They're not bad guys. They're just on their way home from work. How do you arrest someone for feeding their family? The only way you don't give them a misdemeanor citation is if they fail to appear a bunch of times and they're going to do it again. So this particular officer gives state citations because of his idea that if you're arresting someone, actually you're arresting them because they're going to work and for attempting to feed their family. And officers echoed the sentiment over and over. We can't arrest everyone who is driving without a license. If we arrested everyone, there wouldn't be people left on the streets to patrol. And then he says he actually used to do more arrests, but that he stopped because he didn't feel like he was making a difference. And that every time you arrest someone, it takes you off the street where you could be fighting real crime. And so over and over, officers would say they didn't think that driving without a license was a real crime. They often gave people state citations when they could arrest them, but sometimes they felt like their hands were tied. So this bottom quote is an officer who says that if they have no driver's license, sometimes we have to take them into custody. I mean, we'll do the effort and we'll look them up to try to figure out who they are, because you don't want to take someone in for no driver's license, but sometimes you just have to. And so this goes back to, I believe it was Don's earlier point, that officers are really preoccupied with knowing who the person is. If someone doesn't have an ID, the officer doesn't know if they have any warrants out. The officer doesn't know who's in front of them. And, you know, to the officer, they'll arrest that person because their idea is, we'll take that person to jail, and the jail will figure out who that person is. Pre-287G, this wasn't as much of a problem as it is post-287G. Obviously, post-287G, that person is processed, identified and processed for removal. But I do want to emphasize that, you know, on rides, officers definitely didn't arrest everyone that they could have. They frequently accepted Mexican passports and matriculas as identification. Sometimes they accepted fake Tennessee IDs that you buy on the corner store because that's what the person had in front of them. But obviously, a lot of people have been arrested for driving without a license, and the majority of people processed for removal through 287G have been for low-level offenses. So they don't arrest everyone. In fact, they arrest a minority, but even that minority, it has a substantial effect on the community. And officers make over 300,000 traffic stops a year. So, you know, the number of people that they come in contact with is immense. They sometimes make arrests because they feel like it's their job, but as they say, they don't take it home at night because at the end of the day, they want to go home. So, you know, what's happening in the Nashville Police Department is really a result of the police department culture. This emphasis on traffic stops as a way to fight crime has really had a detrimental effect on the Latino community who bears the brunt of these enforcement efforts. So it's not necessarily that they're targeting immigrants, although I'm sure that there are some that are. But what I'm trying to make the point here is saying there doesn't have to be racial profiling for there to be really devastating consequences for the Latino immigrant community. Officers can just follow the law, and people will still be arrested and deported, even if they're not being targeted. So the next information I'm going to give you is from the Davidson County Sheriff's Office regarding who's been arrested and booked into the jail. So this is data from the Davidson County Sheriff's Office pre and post 287G about the number of arrests. This is a little bit misleading because the column on the left pre-287G is 27 months of data, and on the right is 38 months of data. That's why there's so many more arrests on the right than on the left. But in the 27 months before 287G was implemented, 95,000 people were booked into the Davidson County Jail. 11.7% of them were foreign-born. And through the Davidson County Sheriff's Office sending information to the Law Enforcement Support Center, 68 people were issued ICE detainers. Of the foreign-born, over 60% were Mexican, and the next largest group was Guatemalans, who made up 4%. So after 287G was implemented, so this is 38 months, and this data ends in June 2010, there were about 152,000 arrests. 14,991 of them were foreign-born, so that's 10.8% of arrests. So pre-287G, we have 11.7% of arrestees foreign-born. Post-287G, we have 10.8% of arrestees that are foreign-born. And just to break down who these people are post-287G implementation, 7,742 people were identified for removal. Over 70% of those identified for removal were Mexican. 60% of them were below the age of 30, and 95% of them were male. And so this number, 7,742, is the number of ICE holds or detainers issued by the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. So it's not necessarily that all those people were removed, but all those people were identified for removal. And we don't have numbers on what ends up happening to those people. So just to give you some information about interviews from the deputized immigration officers regarding what they think about the limits of their immigration enforcement authority, 15 deputized officers implement the 287G program, but when the program started and the Davidson County Sheriff's Office wanted people to apply for this training, over 200 employees applied for 15 positions. That's 1/4 of all Sheriff's Office employees wanted to be 287G immigration officers. And when you asked the people who were ultimately selected why it is that they were so interested, all of them talked about the particular case of the drunk driver, the local controversy, and then this idea that being involved in 287G allowed them to get federal training, and it was new, and it was exciting, and it was different because they got their own little office, they got to use computers, they got to screen people. It was a way for them to feel that they were making a difference in a job that tended to be a little bit monotonous. So when I started this project, and I wanted to go into the sheriff's office to understand what they were doing, I really wanted to understand how officers exercise their discretion, because I felt that this was it was a bureaucracy, and in bureaucracies, people exercise discretion. And what I learned is they don't exercise any discretion. They issue detainers for everyone who's removable, and they think that it's the local ICE office's job to decide whether or not to remove them. So there are people processors or identifiers, but they're not in charge of removal, from their perspective. So over and over, immigration officers talked about their limited role and authority. So, I'd ask them about their discretion, I would ask them about their job, and these are the things they would say. My powers are the power to question someone as to their admissibility or inadmissibility for deportation. And beyond that, my powers are none. I get all these guys in front of me who say, you can let me go, you can let me go. And I say, you don't understand. I'm not the man. And so to them, the man is really the federal government and the local ICE office, whose job it is to exercise discretion. Because to deputized immigration officers, making these decisions about who should actually go once they're identified is above their pay grade. And this is another officer. We kind of do what is directed from the top. It depends on the feds. I don't know why they change their mind on what they do, but we have to do whatever they recommend for us. Me, personally, I don't take it personally. If they tell me they want to ROR people, I'll do it. If they tell me they want no bond, no bond. It's just a job. And so over and over, deputized immigration officers expressed their frustration that actually the messages that they got from the federal government changed as the program was implemented. So at the very beginning of the program, no one got immigration bonds. And then there was one summer when everyone with misdemeanor offenses was released on their own recognizance, And so when the local newspaper reported on this, everyone thought it was a victory because people who were arrested for driving without a license for a month or two were released on RORs. But what it actually was, and it was not reported, was that the local offices of detention and removal ran out of money. And so they were waiting for an influx of resources in order to keep processing everyone for removal as they had done before. So 287G is obviously controversial because it results in the removal of many more criminal offenses and serious offenses. But to deputized immigration officers, the fact that they don't exercise any discretion makes them think that they're fair. So we're helping the federal government. We have a lot of sympathy for people who come through this program. There are a lot of people who are good people, and we feel sorry for them. It's probably not their fault, but we can't be subjective in how we deal with them, because that's how you get in trouble. We have to be consistent, and the only way to be consistent is to process everyone. And they also have this idea that, they're force multipliers, they're helping the federal government, and I think sometimes they think they're helping immigrants too, because they think that if they process an immigrant and the person is in front of an immigration judge, then maybe they'll get to stay. And so they very much use this helping frame. They're helping everyone. It's not their fault that people are deported. That's ICE's fault. And so, they're not the judge. They're going to process everyone no matter what type of crime. And then, obviously, there's always the rhetoric of the law is the law. I would say that if you boil it down to that, if you say, okay, if someone is pulled over for a driver's license, they committed a crime, they're a criminal. Most of these people are good people, good, hardworking people, but they're violating some kind of law. Two laws. One's a civil immigration law, but the other one is a criminal law. It might happen to be a misdemeanor, but it's the law, and that's an apolitical statement. That's just the law. So I'm sorry, I just threw a bunch of data out at you. I just want to conclude that, what ends up happening in Nashville is that thousands of unauthorized immigrants have been removed for low-level offenses, such as driving without a license, trespassing, or a lot of people are also arrested for previously failing to appear in court because people are issued misdemeanor state citations and they don't go and book themselves in because they're afraid to go downtown. The moment that they don't go to court, there's a warrant out for their arrest, and more people are picked up that way. And even though there's a sense amongst local officers and even the sheriff's office that there's something unfair when low-level crimes lead to deportation, the police department says it's not their fault because they're enforcing state laws, and their officers can't ignore the fact that they can identify people. And an officer doesn't want to get in trouble. They don't want to be the person that lets someone go who had a warrant that they didn't know about. So officers think they're just doing their job, and they don't have immigration enforcement authority. And then the sheriff's office says they don't decide who to screen because they don't arrest anyone. They don't have patrol authority. They don't control who comes into their custody. They're screening everyone identically, and so they don't control who comes to them, and they don't control who's removed. So basically, it's the classic story where everyone's pointing fingers. No one is responsible, and it's a devastatingly effective tool for removing a lot of people. That's all I have, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes?
You mentioned that the program doesn't actually have to involve racial profiling in order to have a tremendous impact on the Latino community, but you also talked a lot about location-based policing. And so I'm just wondering, did you look at statistics around racial profiling, and is the location-based focus of the police work corresponding with race?
Right.
How does that play out?
Okay, so actually I don't have the police data. I only have the arrest data. So I can't say. I thought about getting that data, but really proving racial profiling is such an enormous endeavor that I couldn't do it for my dissertation based on the other things that I wanted to do. And so location-based policing almost always coincides with where minorities are because minority communities are low income, and in low-income areas there's more crime. So it's always a problem, but I guess I don't know how to prove it. And I certainly couldn't do it for this project. Yes?
Well, just kind of following up on that, in terms of the stop data, do you have it disaggregated by race?
I don't have it disaggregated by race, but the Tennessee state, they collect data on traffic stops. They collect it by race and they collect it by location. I don't have it, but it exists. And there was a law passed several years ago where they wanted the police department to keep that sort of data. Even though they're not mandated to keep it anymore, officers still do it. And the only problem is that the officer decides how to classify the person. Right. So, you know, sometimes the Latinos end up being white in the data, but there is information. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that, You mentioned that one of the attractions to the 287G program was the officers got their own office and computers and greater responsibility. We've been trying to follow the money with the 287G program for some time, and I was wondering if you had any insights into whether it was the federal government that paid for those computers and that office space, or whether it was the local police department.
The federal government, so I don't know the numbers of the overall effect on Davidson County, but as far as who pays for what, the federal government pays for the training and the equipment. And then the local sheriff's office pays the salaries of the people, is my understanding. And the ICE officers have 2 offices that they all share, so it's 2 or 3 people per office. And they have computers and they have internet access and then access to the federal databases. And that's the way it is in the jail. Anything else? Yeah. A couple of them did because it was a higher rank, but for several of them it was a lateral move. So they didn't get paid anymore, but they just thought it was a better working environment.
At some point?
Yes. The Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition did amazing grassroots organizing. I believe it was in 2000 where immigrants were allowed to get driver's licenses without having a social security number. And then they found out that people had been coming in from out of state and that people who were issuing the driver's licenses had been on the take. And it was a huge local controversy because they were selling Tennessee driver's licenses to some people from out of state. So yes, there was a period where they were allowed to get, it wasn't a driver's license, it was a certificate of driving that wasn't supposed to be it was like a compromise. It wasn't supposed to be ID, but it did give you permission to drive. That was around for about a year, but it was a weird compromise, it didn't work. And so they're no longer able to get driver's licenses. The people who did have licenses, they've been expiring, and so pretty soon no one will have one anymore, and they can't renew them. The only thing I will say is that when officers encounter people who have expired driver's licenses, they technically are within their rights to keep the driver's license, but usually they don't because they say it's actually waived. I mean, the person shows ID, it's expired, and then officers will say, they made the effort to go get a license. It's not their fault they can't get one now, and they usually don't arrest them for that. Yes?
You noted that sometimes they don't arrest them, but they give them the...
Right, the state citation.
Yes.
Yes.
When they get to court, are they asked there for proof of citizenship? I mean, are they...
No.
What happens then?
They go at 7 in the morning. There's hundreds of people there because they issue a lot of misdemeanor state citations. They present themselves in front of the judge. They pay a fine. They go on their way. There's been maybe 1 or 2 people picked up that way, but they were felony offenders, like real felonies, not fake felonies. But no, I mean, people are afraid because the jail is by the courthouse, and so people think they're going to get picked up. But you talk to people who went and took care of it, and they'll say, no, ICE wasn't there. I did it.
Just wanted to remind everyone, the event is being webcast, so if you could just wait till you get a microphone, that way the camera and the webcast can pick it up, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Michelle.
Thanks.
Can you talk a little bit more about performance measures? You said a little bit about how the bosses like it when there are large numbers, but are there actual quotas set, or how are they judged or promoted?
For the police department. There's no quotas in the sense that having quotas is illegal, and so if you ask officers what their quota is, they don't have one. Everyone has a vague idea of how many traffic stops is enough. Some say 40 a month, some say 50 a month. The more, the better. And then every Friday, precinct leaders and commanders have a meeting where they talk about all of the things that their officers did. And so no precinct commander wants to be the precinct with the least amount of traffic stops or the least amount of activity. So there is some competition within the precincts regarding like what their officers do, and in that way they generate more stops. It's a philosophy of policing based on the ComStat program. Okay, it's 12:30 now, so I think the next panel has to go. Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Shamada. Now we are actually moving ahead of schedule, unheard of, I believe, for these things. But we will move on to our afternoon panel. The aim of the afternoon panel, and if everybody who's on it can make their way up, and we'll get reorganized up here for a couple of minutes. We sort of bled over, not surprisingly, this morning into the aim of the afternoon panel, which is to focus on the ground impact of 287G in secure communities, and talk with the folks who are dealing with it on the front lines, people who work for various NGOs, church organizations, and others. We had hoped also to bring the law enforcement. We had invitations out to Brian Stout, who is the government liaison for the federal government liaison for Arlington County. Given events this morning, I think I understand why he maybe didn't make it, but he sends his regrets. And we also spoke with the police chief, Tom Manger, but neither one was able to join us. But we will take a couple of minutes here to get the technicalities set up, and then I'll be introducing our moderator and panelists.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I have not seen Lenny here. I think Lenny was going to come if she can come late. You all right? Yeah. Oh, good. All right, so we will get started. And it's my pleasure to introduce Michelle Waslin. She's the Senior Policy Analyst at the Immigration Policy Center, the Division of American Immigration Council in Washington, D.C. She has published widely on these issues and on immigration, and we're thrilled to have her moderating this panel. Each of the panelists will take about 8 to 10 minutes to give a brief introductory statement. Then we're going to turn it over to Michelle to comment and ask questions. And then we'll open it up to everybody. And again, just a reminder, state your name. We're being webcast, so state your name, your organizational affiliation, and ask your question. Michelle.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to say a couple words at the beginning to kind of summarize what I hear in this conversation and to contextualize this particular panel. But I think that from ICE's perspective, they have this huge mandate, right? There are 11 to 12 million people who are unauthorized in the country. Plus, there are legal immigrants who can be deported for crimes that they've committed. They're responsible for enforcing the law against employers who are knowingly, willingly hiring unauthorized workers, smugglers, others. So this is, we're talking millions of people. And, they know that they have limited budget and limited resources. We all believe that there's no way you can actually deport all of those millions of people. So until we have a legalization program and basically take 11 million people off the table outside of their mandate, we're going to continue to have these problems, though, in large-scale enforcement. And so one of the ways that ICE has been dealing with this more recently is by partnering with state and local police enforcement. But I think that we in the room see that as actually widening the net and not narrowing it and helping to prioritize it. So there's this tension between their priorities that they're setting because they need to, right, because there's such a large mandate, and how they're going about doing it, which is basically outsourcing the identification and detention of people who may be deported to state and local police departments. And 287G and secure communities have been the main point of this conversation today, but of course there are other programs, other partnerships between ICE and state and local police as well. And now, of course, we're seeing the emergence of state and local laws and ordinances like SB 1070, which are great. Also, trying to force local law enforcement into these immigration enforcement activities. So I think that there are two real questions here. What's the impact on ICE and its ability to control these partnerships and determine their priorities? And I think we've talked a lot about that already today and some yesterday. And then what is the impact on communities? And I think we've already heard some very compelling stories from the communities about individuals. You know, I was really struck when Jen Smyers was saying that churches are no longer safe places, that they cannot say that they are a safe place for immigrants to go there. And again, we've heard other real compelling individual stories. But I think that this panel is really focusing more on that community level and what is the impact on individuals and communities, but also on the agencies and individuals that are trying to represent and help the immigrants in those communities. So with that, I'm going to quickly introduce the panel. We're scattered all over the place, so let's see how I do. First, Chris Newman. He is the legal director and general counsel for the National Day Labor Organizing Network, NDLON. Chris has really become a leading voice on enforcement issues nationwide, so we're very happy to have him here. Next, here we have Adelina Nichols, and she is the executive director of the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. And we all know that Georgia has become a very hot spot for immigration enforcement, so excited to hear what she has to say. Then we will move to Jeanette Smith, who is the director of the South Florida Interfaith Worker Justice. Many of us know that Florida actually had the first statewide 287G MOA several years ago, so we'll need an update on what's happening there. Then we have on this side, Lenny Gonzalez. Lenny is currently the president of the board of directors of the Shirlington Employment and Education Center. She also seems to sit on every committee and board in Northern Virginia, and she's also my neighbor. So very happy to have her here. And then finally, Marty Rosenbluth is going to clean up for us. He is kind of the newly minted executive director of the North Carolina Immigrant Rights Project. And again, North Carolina is another one of these hotspots, and Marty has been very, very active in these issues at the state level and at the national level. So we have some real experts here, and I think I've said enough, so I'll turn it over to Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle. I don't know. Find a mic that works. There's plenty. Hi, everybody. I'm going to start my presentation with Fox News, because usually that's where we receive information about the development of secure communities. A couple weeks ago, our organization was in federal court asking for a preliminary injunction demanding all publicly available documents on the issue of the opt-out because of the confusion that David spoke about. Perhaps not coincidentally, on that same day, Undersecretary Morton and Secretary Napolitano were both on Fox News being interviewed about the Secure Communities program. And Secretary Morton was saying multiple times how the program was, quote, revolutionizing immigration enforcement. Janet Napolitano was speaking, as she does, about the force multiplication effect of using local police. And ironically, on the Bill O'Reilly show, where Janet Napolitano was receiving gargantuan amounts of praise from Bill O'Reilly about the Secure Communities program, underneath the banner where they scroll the text underneath, it said, and I quote, Obama's best kept secret, the Secure Communities program. And ironies abound, because I would agree with Bill O'Reilly that Secure Communities has been a secret kept by the Obama administration. Indeed, we are in federal court litigating, trying to receive publicly available information for a program that didn't start until the waning days of the Bush administration, the final 3 months, and it really has been a President Obama initiative. And despite claims to transparency, when the program was initially started, there was only about 8 pages of publicly available data about this new program. And so I'm going to talk a little bit, we covered a lot of ground earlier, so I'll talk a little bit about what are the antecedents of our FOIA, and then just show quickly some community-based results from documents that, again, we've received in federal court. But initially, I want to just sort of frame it by asking 3 sort of questions to frame the discussion. Number one, if the 287G program is a demonstrable failure, and I was going to expound upon why, but I won't, because I think there's a lot of people that have covered that earlier, then why, through the Secure Communities program, are we replicating, repeating, and indeed mandating mistakes that have been so well documented in the 287G program? Question number 2, if we all can agree and there's consensus that the immigration system is broken and that we need statutory reform, then why would we insist on using police to multiply a broken system? And number 3, to what extent does this program in fact contribute to and accelerate fears of immigrants and the conversion of popular sentiment that undocumented immigrants are criminals? To what extent is this program contributing then to the criminalization of immigrants? One quote I think that wasn't mentioned earlier that I just want to mention, David's predecessor, the first operator of the 287G program, Sheriff Pendergraft from North Carolina, who was in charge of state and local coordination, hauntingly said in front of the Police Foundation assembled police chiefs, there's about 200 police chiefs, I was in the room, he said, and it's been documented in the Nation magazine article on 287G, to police, he said, if you suspect that someone in the country is illegally, but you don't have enough information to charge them criminally, call us because we can, quote, make them disappear. That was the antecedent of the very programs that we're discussing today. Indeed, Sheriff Joe Arpaio received 14 new deputized officers in the last couple of weeks, despite the kabuki theater in the media that you hear about whether or not he's fighting back against Obama or otherwise. Janet Napolitano used to live in Maricopa County. She brought him his 287G agreement in Phoenix. She has seen firsthand the complaints of people in her hometown and has still yet to sever that contract. So I think it does raise questions about the commitment to even take seriously the questions that we're raising in this conference today. So I won't talk too much more about Maricopa County. I want to show a real quick video just to, again, highlight how this plays out on the ground. This is Pinal County, Arizona. Remember the McCain build the dang fence commercial? This is that sheriff's jurisdiction. This is a picket of union members in the middle of the desert. A video taken by a friend of mine who's a union organizer with the iron workers. They're doing a picket in the middle of the desert against an employer that was violating labor laws. Okay, just pause it. You can barely hear it. The security guard says they were talking in Spanish, basically, and the sheriff says that's enough.
That's not correct.
They were just marching up and down.
There we go.
The effects were added by the union
Safety
organizers.
belts and they're riding inside a motor vehicle.
What's that?
They violated ARS because none of them are wearing a safety belt and they're inside a motor vehicle.
After the exchange that you just witnessed, they went back to a parked vehicle, and the allegation of the sheriff in this case was that they were witnessed driving in hours earlier with no seatbelts on, and they're in a parked vehicle with tinted windows at this point.
How do you know they're
because
not?
I saw you pull up and they're not wearing.
You saw? Okay, when I pulled up,
Okay,
I got a video.
I'm not
going to
argue with you.
either.
Give me your driver's license.
I'm not going to argue with you.
And I need everybody else's IDs too. They protest trucks. They follow trucks, Suncoast, and then wherever that truck goes, they protest there because Suncoast has unfair labor practices.
That's what he told them.
Breaking the law, blocking traffic, or
Right.
They're blocking traffic in the middle of the desert. I'll skip ahead in the interest of time. Everyone in that car was put into deportation proceedings based on a suspicion of seatbelt violation triggered by an employer calling a union picket. And so that's the 287G program. Our FOIA litigation actually for secure communities was precipitated by what I call a tale of two press releases. On the 1-year anniversary of the Secure Communities program, let me see if I can do this. On the 1-year anniversary of the Secure Communities program, okay. This was the press release touting the achievement of the Secure Communities program. I've highlighted it. Secretary Napolitano went on Fox News and highlighted that a program had apprehended 111,000 criminal aliens in its first year. That seemed really high, the number, to those of us who looked at it. Later, and indeed, they embellished these crimes as ostensible crimes, including burglary and serious property crimes, and that was the line that was told to the media. Since then, some reporters inquired about those numbers and wanted to see what kind of serious criminals, which again was the headline of the press release, were apprehended. And the DHS has since redacted, changed, gone back, not responded to the reporters, and changed the thing to say that people were just merely charged or convicted with crimes in the first year. You can see that. That's the one that's currently on the website with little asterisks, very small down at the bottom, acknowledging the mistake. And so it became clear that the publicly available information was misleading, what little there was there. And so we've filed a Freedom of Information Act request to receive information about how the program has been conceived initially and how it's functioning. DHS resisted providing data like they did with TRAC as well, and so we were forced to go to federal court. And so, oh good, I'm within time. In the last minute, I'll show some of the data that we've received, and again, this litigation is ongoing. But indeed, not only were there are not 110,000 criminal aliens. Of the 110,000 people that were apprehended, very few were serious criminal aliens of any kind. The majority were picked up, as we now know, for less serious offenses, or indeed weren't even convicted of crimes whatsoever. And so the numbers are clear. 79% were quite smaller. And indeed, 28% had no criminal records whatsoever. They were not charged. They were merely put into removal proceedings. And in some places, those numbers are really high. Some places, 82% of people who are transferred into ICE custody have no criminal conviction either. And the number goes down to Maricopa County, where 54% remain unconvicted and just handed over. And so one wonders when they say, you know, that there's a shifting of the burden of proof on the advocacy community. You know, the numbers in these jurisdictions, I think, you know, don't lie. Clearly, something is going on here in terms of a dissonance between the stated intention of the program to go after serious criminal offenders and those who are actually being deported. So there's more numbers. A lot of the statistics from our FOIA litigation are available on a website that we have, uncoverthetruth.org. This is a campaign that was undertaken by the National Day Labor Organizing Network with the Center for Constitutional Rights and the Benjamin Cardozo Law Clinic. And also there's a phenomenal website called deportationnation.org as well, which tracks almost on a daily basis ICE representations about this program. So I think I stayed within my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't know. See, hello, can you hear me? Yes. Thank you. My name is Adelina Nichols. I am with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. And I would like to begin this conversation explaining and talking about a little bit about our organization and the work that we do and how is that we get to work with the Latino community all over the state of Georgia. Yes, we are a grassroots organization. Our main work, our main activity has been community organizing since 1999. At that time, when we decided to have this organization, we saw the need of organizing rural and urban communities, new immigrants. As many of you guys know, that the Southeast immigrant communities located in this area are new immigrants. We are barely reaching one generation, and that face particular problems and challenges for inside their own communities. We decided to go and visit the communities, creating these local groups in different parts of the state, trying to engage them on community organizing, leadership training in order to defend their civil and human rights. This infrastructure that was created kind of way help us in many ways to have this network that has been mobilized. At the same time, to understand what's going on with the 287G secure communities, what about the immigration reform, DREAM Act, and all the issues that are around happening not only locally, but also nationwide. And of course, at this point, the 287G in Georgia, we have 4 counties that have already implemented. We have 8 counties with the Secure Communities program in place already. And at the same time, in 2007, when the 287G was implemented in Cobb County, we have seen an arrest average of 400 people per month. And up to now, we have Cobb County that have arrested more than 8,000 immigrants just in one county. 2/3 of these Latinos or people arrested, mostly Latinos, 99% Latinos, are arrested under minor traffic violations. I think this is not new for you. But the point here for us, the most important is, yes, to fight together in the struggle to terminate the 287G as well, secure communities, and look forward immigration reform. But at the same time, we wanted to create this community of participation. What I mean by that is that we think that we establish kind of a period of resistance when we decide that we are resisting, communities are in resistance, but at the same time educating them, organizing them on how to defend their own civil rights and human rights. Because at the end of the day, many of us are living the communities that we are visiting, and we don't have any way to help them to create. We think that this is the way for us that have solved many issues. That means that these neighborhoods can have became on the own supervisors, their own human rights leaders locally. But at the same time, we began to see how the 287, those counties that do not have 287G or secure communities start to arrest and sending people to be processed for deportation. The question for us was that it's a lack of supervision. Everybody is like in Georgia, we are living in the Wild West. Everybody is doing whatever they please because there is not control, there is not supervision from ICE or from any kind of authority that can at least put some peace in this state. In the last panel, the panelist was Daniel Hernandez Joseph mentioned about the discriminalization of Latinos in all over the place. If they are not criminals, don't worry, they will be criminals very soon. And then we have this local legislation. In the particular in Georgia, we have the SB 529, SB 350, HB2. Each of those pieces of legislation now, our laws, are affecting and impacting Latino communities at large in the state of Georgia. For example, SB 350 is telling us that if you are undocumented, that if you drive without a license and you are stopped under a minor traffic violation, you will be arrested the first time for between 2 and 10 days. And $500 to $1,000 your fine. And if you are in the 4th traffic minor violation, this will put you in process for deportation. And that's the way that they have found a way to criminalize these Latinos or immigrants that are driving without a license. And that means that it doesn't matter if you have the 287G in place of the Secure Communities program implemented. This is a way that they maintain Latinos in jail and are being processed for deportation. And we did, last week, we met these top officials of the region with Department of Homeland Security, the Office of Civil Rights, as well with Felicia Skinner and all the people in charge of the 287G locally and the secure communities in the area. And unfortunately, of course, they think that this is a matter of perception. We think there is a huge, as somebody mentions before, that there is a huge gap. What is happening from the desk and what is in the real world, in the grassroots world, that people is feeling exactly this harassment, racial profiling, being detained unfair, people that has been detained also walking or driving a bicycle or being a passenger. It doesn't matter if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, if you have kids on the car, if you are the only one that is helping your family economically, it doesn't matter. That means that that the numbers, in particular with the 287G, are the numbers very high. 15,000 people has been processed for deportations, but in particular in Georgia, secure communities hasn't have like a great impact like in other states. The biggest concern is the 287G, but also those detentions and people processed for deportations that are not like located into the 287G or into the Secure Communities program, because the counties that are arresting people are not, they don't have the official authorization to do that. And those numbers, exactly, we don't know exactly how it's handled, but the problem here is and we, in many ways, blame the lack of supervision from ICE, because they haven't been able to supervise all these other communities. And just there is a case that, very particular case. This person was detained in Cobb County. He has been in the country 32 years, and he was arrested under a minor traffic violation. An older guy, like 60-year-old, was interviewed by the ICE agent inside Cobb County jail, and the officer was telling him, you know, you have been long enough in the country. You should see a judge or ask for a court hearing here. And the guy didn't believe him. This person didn't believe what the ICE agent was telling him. So he decided to sign their voluntary departure. And I can hear this lawyer from the Department of Homeland Security, Office of Civil Rights, telling me, but you know, he missed his opportunity. But I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that the right thing to do is that the police, the ICE agents must have told them, please call your family, you don't have anything else to do, find a lawyer, find a way for you, get out of jail, I don't need you. That's the part that this game is playing between the police enforcement and also the ICE agents. We have heard also that there are quotas that as long as they have enough beds, that would be the amount of people that would be processed for deportation. At this time, 400,000 beds are available. We know that last year were more than 390,000 people that was processed for deportation. And also, the priorities that we have been seeing is that these priorities of level 1, 2, or 3 levels of detention mean nothing, because if they don't find people with level 1 of crimes, they go and arrest whatever, you know, it doesn't matter. And that's the part where all many workers, many immigrants under minor traffic violations has been detained. Of course, we have also the part where are criminalizing these immigrants under the local legislation. Another one, for example, HB2 is a state law that says that if you are undocumented, you are not allowed to receive any kind of public benefits. That means that all the budget assigned to the English as a second language schools no longer are a good source to learn English, because if you don't have a social security, you are not allowed to get English classes. If you want to get any kind of if you have a business right now as an undocumented immigrant and you don't have a social security or a driver's license or a legal status, your authorization, your business license is going to be canceled. That's another way to close the door for more Latinos. In particular, also the SB 529 was a law that was approved on April 2006 that is the impact of this has been that the Board of Regents, in care of the college education in Georgia, have banned the access for undocumented students to the university. And at the same time, have been implemented the E-Verify locally in the state. And as well, we have now this huge committee that is working I think it's more than 10 legislators working on that new version of the SB 70 in Georgia right now. We think that this is an environment and a climate that we should stand up, and that's the reason that we must do it in all levels, and that's the commitment to educate, to inform, to give this political conscience to our community. It doesn't matter if they are low income, they are very low educated, they know because they are feeling that their human rights are being violated. They are willing to participate. We are working in these committees right now. We are in Middle Georgia, working with different communities where people has been arrested without these counties having the 287G or a secure communities. In our meeting that we had last week with ICE, also we were questioning about the bonds. We don't know how is that they come up with these bonds of $5,000, $10,000, and how is that implemented? Is when they start the 287G, when they start to implement it, the bonds from ICE were $1,500. Then they rose to $2,500. Now we are in a position that a person that is being detained under minor traffic violations, and if it's allowed to have the bond, that means that they have to pay $10,000. We do not understand exactly why is this have been implemented. Besides the treatment, I know that they are telling us that confidentiality issues and they cannot provide information, but we at the grassroots level, we are asking for basic information. For example, we just need a number of if the person detained is there, or basic information. Our communities in need to know where the detainee, their family, perhaps their father, their husband, their sister, their brother, their grandmother is in jail, and they do not have a way to interact with them, and we don't have any information, at least to provide basic information, name or a number or the commissary number, which is really important to send money to the families detained. At least they can buy some maruchas, the dry soup, no? Sí. Soup, no soap, soup, dry soup. Okay, and all this year, as a grassroots organization, we are decide to visit all the rest of different communities that that need to be in resistance, that need to have the knowledge of what's going on in order for them to prepare, in order for them to be to participate politically, actively, in the levels that they are able to do it. For us, it has been very important. We have visited perhaps more than 20 to 30 between cities and counties trying to organize the Latino community in regards to their defense of their rights. And basically, many of the issues that are going on in Georgia is happening in North Carolina or in Virginia or in other cities as well. I see all over the place. And but we, as again, as community organizing, decide when the implementation of the 287G, we launch this program called kind of a rapid response. That means that we have opened 7 lines statewide where people can call us and report about the detention, about whatever is going on in their community. We have been collecting and we have documented thousands of cases. And this information have allowed us at the same time to get to know what is going on in their own communities, therefore exactly what are the issues happening there, and be able to help or to send the support or work together or get to down and organize. This is information that we have received, first-hand information. People get into this, they fill this questionnaire in the phone, but at the same time, we are working on educating them what is the process. Because we have seen several abuses from lawyers. That's the other part. When a family person is detained, what we observe is that the civil or the criminal lawyer do not know how immigration law intersects. And they are asking for $1,500, $2,000 just to see the detainee in the detention center, and promising things that they are not able to accomplish. That's the reason that for us was very important that people that is detained will need an immigration lawyer, but later in the process, not at the moment at the detention in the local jail. And we need to educate and to protect them in terms of these abuses. It's a lot of lawyers around taking the money from the Latinos. Perhaps they didn't know how to deal with this new issue, or perhaps they knew and they didn't care. And it's something that it is important. At the same time, the impact of all this climate against undocumented immigrants is also the abuses in labor cases. We have heard every single day cases of Latinos that have worked and are not being paid.
Repeat what we've heard today. I mean, I think we know the stories. I mean, we know the mother dropping her child off and getting stopped because her windows are tinted a little too dark, and the next thing you know, she's deported. I mean, I think we all know those stories. What I've been struck by with interfaith worker justice, of course, our work has to do with workplace conditions and inequities in the workplace, and the environment that's created by the immigration issues. And just starting personally for a moment, I think about my own immigration story. My family's been here. I have family in the early 1900s that came, and then I have family that's pre-Revolutionary War. But then I was married a year and a half ago to a Panamanian immigrant who's been here 4 years. And I realized at a recent workshop, because we do a lot of workshops to help educate folks, both immigrants and non-immigrants, but get to think about immigration and our place in immigration. And so I'm sure many of you have done that timeline where you see the whole history of immigration and you put yourself in there somewhere. And I realized my story was different now, because I now have my husband's story. I have someone who came here on a guest worker visa from Panama, worked in unions, was a carpenter in Panama, came with a job offer. It turned out to be a trampa, a trick. It was a slavery situation. He escaped in Orlando with 3 other Panamanians, ended up in Miami, knowing no one. didn't have a ticket back home. Bless his heart, pulled out the newspaper and started to try to look for work, and someone said, well, you won't find work like that. You have to go to Home Depot. You have to go out in the street. So he became a jornalero, a day laborer looking for work. And I think about his experience and the process we've gone through with him getting his residency, and me, who prior to my work with Interfaith practiced law for 10 years as an immigration attorney. I've processed many, many, many cases. I have reached a stage who has a greater understanding of the situation, that because of the environment that we've created, I can't even feel comfortable when my husband went to get his work permit. I had to go with him, because what if something went wrong? What if there was some miscellaneous thing that happened and something went wrong, and the next thing I knew, he was in detention? That's the reality that we've created. Now, I will say that immigration on that processing the family petitions has tried to be the kinder, more customer-oriented face. But, and in fact, I was rather shocked. We went for an interview at How Smoothly It Went, and I remember walking out and saying, they were so nice to us, and being a little surprised, because I'm living in this environment where on a daily basis I'm watching families separated, where I'm watching a child when his home is raided at 5 a.m., 7-year-old U.S. citizen runs outside, climbs up in a tree. He doesn't know who armed men are that burst into his house. He climbs a tree and starts to scream, criminales, criminales. All he knows is he's protecting his family. His father was away at work. He's letting the neighbors know. And an ICE officer screams at this child to shut up, come down out of the tree, and sit down, or he would arrest him and his entire family. I can't think that's the purpose of these laws, that we are not going to threaten 7-year-old U.S. citizens. So I think we know the stories. We know it's there. But the environment that's been created has been one in which we are all afraid. That someone said this morning, the fear is palpable. There's a rumor of a raid, and families are hiding in the woods outside Homestead, a farming community in the southern part of the county. They're not sending their children to school because they don't know what will happen. You saw Chris's numbers. Did you see how many Florida counties were on that list? How many Florida counties, including my own home county of Miami-Dade, where we actually have a higher percentage of non-criminals deported per secure communities than Sheriff Joe Arpaio? How's that possible? You tell that story and people are shocked. But I think that's the scary part, is most people don't know. Sheriff Joe Arpaio gives us a villain. We see him. Most people don't know. It's happening quietly. My own board, my own members of Interfaith Worker Justice, they say to me, oh no, Jeanette, recently in the elections, the gubernatorial race, if any of you saw anything of happening in Florida, was immigration was a very, very big political issue. And there were claims by the Republican candidates that we would out Arizona. And one of the candidates running was our state attorney general, who of course approved, as we all know, one of the first statewide secure communities programs in the country for Florida. And as I'm watching immigration and these programs be bandied around like political footballs, yet my own board would say, oh, but that will never happen, Jeanette. You don't have to worry about that. This can't happen in Florida. And I'm like, hold on. First of all, we live in a bubble in South Florida. We do tend to think because we have such a high percentage of immigrants that this can't happen. We live in the South. We need to remember that. We may need to go north to get south, but we live in the South. We have no state-level Department of Labor. We're the only state in the country without one. We live in the South. We have a minimum wage law. We're a little ahead of Mississippi, but we have no one to enforce it. That's our reality. And when I have to do these pieces of education, even with my own board, when I have a board member that says, well, you know, Jeanette, we're really about worker justice. Are you sure we should be doing immigration work? Aren't there enough other people doing that? And I'm like, how do you think they don't fit together? How do you not see that issue? How do you not see the abuses? And I feel like the minute Arizona passed, the first question that went through my mind, by the way, my copious amount of free time, I'm doing a doctorate in anthropology, so my focus is on wage issues and migrant workers and workplace conditions. And the first thing I saw, using the anthropology term, was othering. I'm like, oh no. This isn't just going to have an effect in Arizona. In the entire country, we have now othered immigrants. They are now those people, and we can do whatever we want to them because they are different. We cannot pay them. There are quotes coming out of Arizona to our Interfaith Worker Justice Office there where employers are saying, go ahead, try and make me pay you. That's our reality. Wage theft was what the last presenter was talking about, is rampant. It's an epidemic. Now, granted, and I could talk wage theft in my sleep, so we won't go too far on that, but it does happen across borders, and it's not just a matter of being documented, undocumented. But the most egregious cases do happen to the undocumented. The most egregious cases happen to those who are marginalized. Low-wage workers, no matter what their status, native-born or immigrant, it is happening. Now, fortunately, something we've managed to pass in Miami-Dade County is a countywide wage theft ordinance, and it's a model that's being followed in other parts of the country. And I have to thank you for flying me up here, because yesterday I sat in the plane with the county manager from Monroe County, and we're going to talk next week about doing an ordinance in Monroe County. But I feel that sometimes we have to approach it from that perspective. When you start talking about wage theft and you start to tie in those issues that are just worker issues, no matter what your status, you start to find some commonality. And I think that there's the problem of commonality, of othering people, like somehow they're different. And then there's the problem, 287G secure communities. When you have programs like this, it creates an environment where, okay, that becomes more normalized, this type of arrangement or agreement. So we see Arizona, and many of us are shocked, but then we start to see it popping up in other communities, and it's like it's a little more normalized, that these agreements start to happen. And when you actually have members of our legislature that have drafted our uniquely Florida-style Arizona law, they have gone so far as to mention that Canadians and those from visa waiver countries, all but 4 of which are European, the other 4 are Asian, will be presumed, with a valid passport, will be presumed to be in the country in a documented status. We won't check farther. And then we want to say, on the other hand, there's no racial profiling. I can't fit those things together. So a lot of what we're doing, because one of the questions they told us when we were preparing today is to talk about what's happening in our local communities and how it's happening with native-born, non-native-born, and how we're working on this. We're doing a lot of education. We're doing a lot of education in churches. We're bringing out the stories so that people start to see what the reality is, that you have in Monroe County that we just mentioned. You have the landscaper that's cleaning, that's out doing the yard, and a local sheriff who doesn't even have a 287G stops him and asks for his documents, and he's cutting the grass. Okay, you have this type of thing happening a lot, and you bring out those stories and people start to see the connections. But I'm also facing this situation where I'm working against the messaging of the government. We heard those comments this morning. So when I'm trying to talk to somebody from the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, good people, but I'm talking to a particular rabbi, and he's stuck on that illegal, that broke the law. And you've all heard the screams of, which part of illegal don't you understand? I'm sort of stuck on the which part of human being don't you understand, but that's another issue. But you hear them talk about, well, the law was broken. And then we heard the examples this morning. I mean, there's no room I could be in where I said, well, have you ever done a rolling stop at the stop sign? Have you ever, gone a little higher, then you've broken the law. So we can do all of those things. But I find that I have a lot of education to do with getting people to understand. Our local Episcopal diocese has done a great deal of information. Did you just want to tell me? Yeah, I was about to. You could just tell me. Our local Episcopal diocese has sent out a lot of information, and a lot of the priests have been behind it, but then others have been like, well, Arizona, they really were afraid, and there really was an issue. So I think we're constantly fighting this messaging that Chris pointed out about how many criminals were picked up. And I think as long as that's going on, it makes our educational pieces locally very, very difficult, and it's one by one, and that takes an awfully long time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to move to this side, a little further north to Virginia, although Virginia is still the south.
Yeah, that's painful sometimes for me to accept that we are the south. Good afternoon. I'm Lenny Gonzalez. I live in Arlington, Virginia. I have lived in the next crossed the bridge for many, many years. I'm very glad to live there, but I had also had the opportunity to work all over the Commonwealth of Virginia, and believe me, once you cross 45, 50 miles from here, from the beginning of the line of Virginia, it's almost a different country. We're talking a different thing. I am a member of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. I'm also the chair of the board of our Day Laborer Center in Arlington, the Shirlington Employment and Education Center, probably one of the few in Virginia that has the total support of the county government, and we're very grateful for that. I do want to recognize several of my colleagues that are here that know much more about this issue than me. The current chairman of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations, Mr. Edgar Aranda. So thank you for being here. And also, I think I'm gonna talk more about what is happening in Virginia, the smallest county in the United States, and how we still today, November 18, 125, we still hoping that there is a way to opt out. I was not here in the morning, regretfully. I was attending another conference upstairs, so I didn't hear what they said, but I hope we are hoping there's still a way to opt out, and that will correct it. I want to recognize Margaret Hung, who has been really a leader in Arlington resident in this fight against secure communities, as well as Chris Strong, who has been a great supporter of us, and others that I think were here earlier at the meeting. So not knowing what they say, if there's opt-out or not, you'll let me know later. Talk quickly about 287G. Like, if we don't have enough in Virginia, Virginia has become one of the most punitive states for immigrants in the United States. You think Arizona, I think Virginia started with that long time ago. During 4 years ago, 3 years ago, in a legislative session, I think we fought at least 130 anti-immigrant bills. We're bracing ourselves for many more better crafted, very well crafted laws that are trying to replicate and duplicate and improve, like they have said, Arizona SB 1070. Arizona 1070. So, like, if we don't have enough, there's already a law in the book. I'm not a lawyer. I just repeating what somebody sent me. It's a law that passed 2 to 3 years ago, that it says that anybody who gets incarcerated in Arlington, their fingerprints have to be in Virginia, fingerprints have to be run through different databases, including the immigration database. 7 localities in Virginia have 287G agreements, mostly in the Northern Virginia area. For 2 governorships during the periods of 2 governors, I will be frank, Democratic governors, we were able to present to them and convince them of the case that there was no need for a 287G agreement with the state police. And we were very successful. We were very proud. The change of guard in January of 2010, and a few months later, we find that one of the first actions of our current Governor McDonnell is to request a 287G agreement between ICE and the state police. No questions, no nothing. It's out there. They're still waiting for a response. Hopefully they're sitting and not waiting, but they're still waiting for a response. They haven't responded. The Coalition of Latino Organizations sent a letter to Ms. Napolitano on August 31st, requesting her not to sign the 287G agreement. It was great work of coalition building. We have 72 signatories of organizations around the state that signed that letter. The coalition received a response from Department of Homeland Security around October 1st. If I understand my colleague Edgar correctly, It was a letter telling us how to complain, the complaint process about 287G. And it seems that later he received just a phone call saying, "Oh, sorry, we sent you the wrong letter. We're still waiting for the correct letter from them." So not much to say. So like if we don't have enough, then we have secure communities in Virginia. I think April 13 or 2000 this year, the Commonwealth of Virginia became one of the states that has now secure communities all over in the entire state. And I will not repeat just what my colleagues here, Adelina and Janet said. It's happening here in Virginia in one way or the other. We have a lot of information in Northern Virginia, but we assume many similar things are happening in the rest. This is a huge state with communities all over, from 10 in one little city to 500 in another city, so we're assuming things are happening. But I'm going to talk about the story of our little county and what happened. And when this was announced in May, a group of people got together and created Edgar, Margaret, and among them, I came at a later time. They created a coalition, the Arlington Coalition Against Secure Communities. And I can imagine they even struggle with the name, because sometimes how do you say I'm against secure communities? They were so devious in putting that name into a program. We even have, with other colleagues from other organizations, big discussions about don't put signs with secure communities cross, because how does that portray in the media? We're thinking one of those TV stations that is only going to focus on that and forget about the rest of the conversation. So it was good. But this coalition is composed of churches, community-based organizations, nonprofit organizations, labor, and residents. And it was formed to stop, or, well, not to stop because it was already implemented, but to find out what is the way to opt out of this ill-conceived program, definitely ill-conceived program. During the summer, there was a large community meeting organized, I think in June, where many in the immigrant community, particularly, it's called the Latino Roundtable, the work of one of our county board members, the only Latino elected in Northern Virginia, and they had a large attendance. I was not there. I'm just repeating what my colleagues told me. And people were the community were beginning to hear about these secure communities, and as you can imagine, getting very, very scared and very, very concerned. But also, I think that triggered the very hard work of many on this coalition. Several of the, 3 of them present in here, that during the summer were very long hours as volunteers researching this issue of secure communities and trying to find the way out of that, the opt-out. All this resulted, always working in Arlington, we have something that is called the Arlington Way. We like to do things and always involve the citizenry. It can become sometimes very cumbersome, very lengthy, but the county is a welcoming, diverse county and really values, we believe, the input of the residents. Through the work of this coalition and some members of the Arlington County Board, the county government, on September 28th, the Arlington County Board unanimously approved a resolution to opt out of Secure Communities program. And this resolution was drafted with community input. You can find it in the Arlington County website. It's an excellent resolution, and it's saying we have to get out of this. We don't want it. This is creating havoc in our community and our relations in the fabric of this community. We don't have it. The same day, the sheriff and the chief of police issue a statement supporting this resolution. It might not be exactly what the coalition wanted, but it was something. It was something. They said that they were supporting the resolution. on September 7, the county manager, recently appointed to work, had to sent a letter to Homeland Security, officially asking them to withdraw of secure communities. I spoke to a county board member yesterday, and this might be, I don't know if it's exactly the official answer, but said Arlington is still waiting for an official response in writing from Department of Homeland Security to the October 7 letter to see if there's an opt-out. In November 5th, there was a meeting of the Arlington County Board, Arlington County Manager with the sheriff, the chief of police, and other staffs with ICE, I can imagine, with ICE. And what we got, there's a press release, you can check it on the website, saying that I was interesting meeting, but not much of information, and they're still trying to find out the way out. Arlington has the manager, the chief of police, the sheriff has said the law will be upheld. They're trying to protect the citizenry of Arlington, but also they want to keep the values of Arlington of diversity and inclusiveness and all that. So a lot of words to say. We're still waiting, even the citizens of Arlington, we're still waiting for that official letter for them saying yes or no. Therefore, our hope that there's still a way to opt out. And I'm seeing Margaret smiling, so I hope they didn't say anything different today. So I don't know. And just to reemphasize that Arlington, the government has said publicly, many of us, the residents, the community organizations, we had always said very strongly that we have never defended criminals. This is not a way to defend criminals. We want criminals to be punished for what they, but we don't want innocent people who have committed the slightest of crimes, if that can be said, to be punished the way they are. We don't want our community to live in the fear that they are currently living, even though I spoke to several people working in the community yesterday, and after the resolution, therefore, in the minds of many immigrants in Arlington has been perceived or understood as a victory, that fear is kind of calming down a little bit, and we're beginning to see people coming back to programs, coming back to English classes, where in the past they had even the attendance to English classes had been reduced. So we're seeing that. So we don't want criminals. The immigrant community doesn't want criminals, and I think it's very important to say, in Arlington, it's 1/3 of the population is foreign-born. It's foreign-born. 1/3 of Arlington population, we're a small county, it's foreign-born. And we still, with all that, we still have probably the lowest criminal rate of this entire metropolitan area. So we don't really need all this. We don't need all these programs. We don't need anything. But we also want to continue working and learning from all our colleagues in here how they're dealing with this issue. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Marty? Take us home.
Probably one of the more futile things you can do is ask an attorney to be brief. Considering we write documents that run thousands of pages and call them briefs. But having said that, and I just want to pick up of one thing that Lenny said, is that the FOIA I most want to file now is how much ICE paid the marketing firm that came up with the phrase secure communities. Because it really is, it really,
healthy forest.
There you go. But because it really is, they really frame the issue on their own terms. And one of the things that I think we need to think about is how we can think out of the box to counteract that. And it's interesting that the people on the panel are from Georgia and Florida and Virginia and North Carolina. And this is available on the web. But this is ICE's rollout map for secure communities. And you can see that it really is primarily a southern phenomenon. Now, North Carolina, I don't want to diss my colleagues from other states, but North Carolina really is way ahead of the curve. I mean, the federal government really has used North Carolina as the testing ground for these measures. So we had secure communities, I think, secondly only to Texas, in terms of counties in North Carolina experiencing this. And when I spoke at the American Immigration Lawyers Conference 2 years ago, almost nobody else at the conference had ever heard of secure communities. And I was trying to explain how it works and what it was. And it's important to understand that on all these measures, whether you're talking about 287G or whether you're talking about secure communities, it's not just a question of the state police. It's not just a question of the county sheriff. It's not just a question of the local police. It's anyone at all with arrest powers. So I was thinking on the panel, what was the most absurd example I could throw out to the audience to explain the dangers? And I said, well, what about a campus cop? Campus cop picks up some Latino kid for loitering, and they end up in deportation proceeding. That would never happen, I thought. Sure enough, this summer, I had a client who was picked up essentially for loitering on UNC's campus. Now, keep in mind, this is the University of North Carolina, which is a very liberal university, in Chapel Hill, which is a very liberal town, in Orange County, which is a very liberal county. So if it wouldn't happen anywhere, it wouldn't happen here. But basically, he was wandering around the campus at 2 o'clock in the morning. Campus cops were suspicious, and they stopped him. And they said, what are you doing? What's your name? And he's a visa overstay. He came from Venezuela when he was a young kid. And having taken high school civics at Chapel Hill High School, he said, I don't have to tell you my name unless you tell me what law I broke. And the officer said, no, you need to give us your name, and you need to tell us what you're doing here, or I'll arrest you. And he refused. And he was charged with resisting and obstructing. And he ended up in deportation proceedings from a campus cop. So, I mean, we can talk about the dangers of racial profiling, but in this case, I have to give the campus cop credit. I don't think it was racial profiling. He's been here since he was a little kid, speaks with no accent, doesn't look Latino, has long hair, has earrings, looks like your typical Chapel Hill hippie. But in any case, inadvertently, this campus police officer put this kid into deportation proceedings. So what's going to happen when, not to pick up pejorative, but racist mall cops all across America who don't like Latinos, all they need to do is to accuse the person of shoplifting, to accuse the person of loitering, to accuse the person of any petty offense, because once the fingerprints are taken, the damage is already done. And I'm a big fan of holding people in governments to the standards they set for themselves. And ICE is advertising this as a measure to catch dangerous, convicted criminal aliens, although they go back and forth. Sometimes they say suspected. They kind of change their wording. But, I mean, if ICE wants to come forward and say, okay, this is a measure to enlist local law enforcement in a dragnet to catch anyone who's here without the proper papers, at least we can have a debate based on what it is, not based on what they're saying it is. At least we can have a debate based on the truth. I do think it's very important. I didn't want to kind of buttonhole David too much on this whole question of prosecutorial discretion and priorities. Because again, as a practicing attorney who's in the immigration courts every single week, I have to tell you it doesn't exist. ICE is not exercising its discretion, and I want to say they're being indiscreet, but I realize that's not the opposite of not exercising discretion. But we've tried time and time again with the deportation and removal officers on the local level, when our clients get arrested, say, look, this person does not meet ICE's priority. This person should not be in ICE detention. And they say, take it to the immigration court. In the immigration court, I think it's about 8 or 10 times now, we've gone into the immigration court and we've said to the judge, we said, listen, Your Honor, my client does not meet what ICE is saying is the priority for people who are supposed to be in removal proceedings. I want to get a continuation of his case to discuss prosecutorial discretion with the ICE trial attorneys. And the ICE trial attorney's response is really interesting. The first time I raised this was in a bond hearing. And I was throwing this out as just an additional factor. Look, he has 3 U.S. citizen kids. He has no criminal record. You know, in any way, it doesn't meet the ICE priority. So, you know, we're going to try to get the case dismissed. The ICE trial attorney, okay, keep in mind, you know, he works for ICE, objected to the judge to me raising the memo from John Morton in the court. So I said, how can you object to me raising a memo from the head of your department in the immigration court? And he was just like huffing and puffing. The second time I tried to raise the issue of prosecutorial discretion, and this was fascinating, the trial attorney said, if I followed those priorities, I would lose 90% of my docket. 90%. And I'm really glad this is on the record. I have to remember to get the recording. Since I'm the attorney of record, I can get the recording of the hearing. And the last time I raised it, which was just last week, the trial attorney said, without knowing the particulars, without knowing any of the facts, she said, I guarantee we won't exercise prosecutorial discretion in this case. Before we had a case, the opportunity to present our case. So I really think that we have to pin ICE down as much as we can on enforcing their existing stated priorities. The other thing I think we have to talk about, and I realize we only have a certain amount of time here, but we have to talk about the collateral effects. Because no one really is talking about not the effect that this has on immigrants in the immigration courts, but what's the effect of immigrants in the criminal court system, where at least for now, unless the incoming Congress decides to change it, immigrants have the same basic constitutional rights that non-citizens do as far as the criminal court procedures go. And what we're seeing is like a total disruption. And I'm hearing this both from prosecutors and from public defenders and from private attorneys, that they put all this time into preparing a case, and then the client is all of a sudden in Mexico before they ever get their state court hearings. Adelina was talking about the difficulty in getting immigration bonds. You know, it also has an effect on the ability to get criminal bonds in the criminal courts. So the major flaw here is that even though, and again, keep in mind that a lot of supporters of secure communities are not the Bill O'Reillys and the right, but are, you know, progressives in the Congress. Like David Price, who's my congressman, is the chair of the committee that oversees ICE's budget. And he is one of the biggest supporters of secure communities. And the argument that he makes, and he believes this sincerely, I mean, I like David, I voted for him, I support him on most other issues, is that he sees secure communities as disengaging local law enforcement from immigration and customs enforcement. And the argument that he makes is that the person who makes the decision on whether or not to put the person into deportation proceedings is not a local police officer, but is ICE. And I can tell you, I cannot even keep my clients clear on the difference between their criminal court case and their immigration court case. It's all the same to people. So I really don't think that people care whether or not the person who made the decision to put someone into deportation proceedings was some anonymous ICE officer sitting in a bunker somewhere under Chicago, or is the local police officer. All they know is that their cousin or their father or their brother or their mother was put into deportation when she went to the grocery store to buy milk. You know, that's all people really care about. The other problem, too, and I think it's a really interesting, some of the things David says, but it creates an accountability vacuum as far as racial profiling is concerned. Because the local police, and I had this conversation with the sheriff of Wake County, we were on a panel this past weekend, and he said, well, you know, we're not engaging in racial profiling, you know, we're just enforcing the law. We're arresting people for driving without a license. And then I says, well, you know, we're not engaging in racial profiling. We don't decide who to arrest. That's the local police's problem. But ICE has the ultimate responsibility because they can exercise their discretion on whether or not to put people into deportation proceedings who were arrested for minor offenses, and they consistently fail to do so. How am I doing on time? A couple more minutes. Okay. So what I think we have to do is to start to get creative in our strategies. Because if we keep pursuing the same strategies, I don't think we're going to get anywhere. Durham County just, what day's today? Today's Thursday? Monday, passed a resolution asking local police to recognize the matricula consular as a legitimate form of identification. Because that takes away then the argument that they have to arrest the person because they don't know who they are. I mean, like, if I was driving home and I leave my wallet at home, which happens at least once or twice a month, and I get pulled over, for speeding or something, the cop is not going to arrest me. He's going to say, "Excuse me, Mr. Rosenbluth, be more careful next time and don't forget your wallet." They're not going to handcuff me and take me in. So we have to try to figure out how on a local level we can put pressure on local authorities to have a non-arrest policy when citations will suffice. The second thing we have to do, is anyone from ICE still in the room? Okay.
They're listening.
I'll say it anyway. I was just kidding. So we have to figure out a way to increase the number of people we have working on this issue. And to steal ICE's own phrase, we need to figure out a way to use criminal defense attorneys as a force multiplier, for people's rights, because there are so many mistakes that are made by criminal defense attorneys, not out of avarice, but because they don't know any better. Like, the biggest problem we have is criminal defense attorneys who say, pay the state bond, and, I'll get you out. Well, no, because if you have an ICE detainer on you or an ICE hold, as soon as you pay the state bond, you pass into ICE custody. So people go from, some rural jail somewhere in North Carolina to, Mecklenburg County Jail, to Stewart County Detention Center, to Mexico, without ever having anyone talk to them at all about what their rights are in the immigration court. So we have to find a way to break through that by educating criminal defense attorneys into the basic rights that people have in the immigration courts. The other thing that we have to do is to figure out which parts of this can we do pro se. Which parts of this equation can be done by non-attorneys. For example, secure communities is predicated on ICE assuming, and I'm throwing this out as hypothetical, I'm not making any accusations here, that people are never going to get access to an immigration attorney, because that's the reality. The overwhelming majority of people who are deported never get to speak to an immigration attorney. So they're calculating that someone's going to go from Moore County to Charlotte to Stewart to Mexico without going before a judge or anything. What if we change that equation? So what if we can train people, to go out to the court and exactly 48 hours on the nose when, after the family pays the bond, they file a habeas corpus petition to try to get the person out? What if we start filing section, and I apologize if I'm lapsing into legalese, but what if we, that's what lawyers do, but what if we start filing section 1983 actions, against the county courts if they hold people 1 minute over the 48 hours? The counties didn't sign up for that. They signed up for this effortless thing. We take the fingerprints, ICE comes, no worries whatsoever. And even more importantly, what if we can train criminal defense attorneys to file really basic, stripped-down, bare-bones immigration bond motions? Like Adelina was talking about. So all of a sudden, rather than having 5 or 6 immigration bond motions a week, the court in Charlotte all of a sudden has 50 or 60. The system will, we have to provide a way to give access to basic justice for people who are caught up in this proceedings. So I'll stop there because I'm sure I'm over time.
Thank you. Thank you to all of our speakers for some really great information. I was really struck in listening to how many people mentioned this lack of information or changing information. I mean, Chris, you sued them to get more information. You're receiving all kinds of different responses about what opt-out means. Can you do it? Can't you do it? But you're still waiting for a final response. And I think that one thing we've seen is that ICE is becoming very adept at changing the language that they use, so that when we complain about a part of the program, they change the language that they use without actually changing the program itself, right? They change how they describe it. And a couple of us were just commenting back that ICE recently changed its website. Are you all aware of that? And some of the things that we used to know where they were and depend upon are no longer there. Information has simply disappeared. And if you're like me and have a lot of documents online that have links to ICE, those links all don't work. So even the things that are still there, you can't find. So this has become, incredibly frustrating as we try to get more and more information from ICE, and they're, playing a shell game with their information, it seems like. So I know there are probably a lot of comments and questions, and we really want to have a good conversation here, but I wanted to just start us out with one question. We had the 287G program, and there were so many complaints and concerns about this program. ICE claims that it changed the MOA and has really changed that program, but then now we see this rapid expansion of the Secure Communities program. You're all in states that have both of them, and so I really want to ask, is one better than the other? Have you seen any of these changes? Does it even make a difference? Do your clients know that there are two separate programs?
Well, I mean, the biggest problem we have is that since so many of our counties have both, we can't tell. I mean, there's no way that we can find out whether someone was picked up under 287G or Secure Communities. But in the counties that are just Secure Communities, we haven't seen any difference at all. And again, this isn't a statistical analysis. This is just based on the clients that we have. But there's been no difference at all in the offenses which people are picked up under. It's mostly people picked up for driving without a license, expired tags, offenses like that.
I'm on a task force at the UC campus about undocumented students, so I'm really curious about this. The student that was picked up.
Just borrow one.
He's coming. He's on his way.
The student that was picked up, was he taken to a campus police department that had Secure Communities?
Well, what happened in his case was that he was picked up by the campus police and he was taken straight to the Orange County Jail, which has secure communities. And in fact, Orange County is actually an interesting county to look at because we actually have a resolution against 287G. So, I mean, even though the county is against 287G, we still ended up with secure communities. And that gets back to what several of the other speakers were talking about, whether this thing is mandatory or optional. Because, I mean, Orange County wanted to opt out, but we didn't think it was possible.
It's also astonishing to now highlight that the steering committees as a fix in the new MOAs. If you look back at the old 287G MOAs, almost every single one of them had a steering committee requirement. And through state records requests, we discovered that not one single jurisdiction complied. So there was complete noncompliance before, and to now sort of go back and say, well, we're going to require steering committees. Well, they were in the last 287G MOAs as well. That's not a feature of the new ones. It just simply hasn't been enforced.
Although they're in the process of trying to create steering committees. It's unclear.
What does that mean? They were in the process of trying to form them since 2002.
So it's not included in the MOA, but we understand that ICE wants to have steering committees in each of the jurisdictions, but it's unclear what the role of the community will be in those steering committees and what power, if any, steering committees will have. Do you have?
Well, I have something to say about steering committees. Please. Yes, having gone to quite a few meetings of this. Oh yeah, my name is Amada Armenta. I'm from UCLA. And having gone to meetings of the steering committee, because in Davidson County, the sheriff actually started a 287G advisory council, he calls it, before 287G was ever started. And there are community members from advocacy organizations who would attend these meetings. But basically what would happen is, it wasn't advisory in the sense that they're not willing to change the program. So everyone sits together exactly like this, and we say the same things over and over. People have been deported for fishing without a license, really crazy stuff. And the sheriff says it's not his fault, it's the police's fault. I mean, it doesn't matter if everyone sits together in a room and there's a steering committee if they're not willing to change their programs.
Thank you. Yeah, I also wanted to ask a question that had come up earlier about the complaint procedure. And there was some question about that in the last panel. I know, Adelina, you said you actually started your own complaint line. Marty, I'm sure that you've tried to complain about these programs. Can you tell us, is there a complaint mechanism in place, and what has been your experience when you lodge a complaint?
Yes, but we create this like an intake form that we start to work on this since 2007. And we do have a lot of thousands of reports on detentions and people processed for deportation and a different kind of abuses. But the main challenge that we have faced having this information in terms of going outside of the office, for example, is that the Latinos or the immigrants do not want to come forward. And that's our main problem. What we have achieved with this, with all these cases that have been documented, we have working on humanitarian visitations to the Stewart Detention Center. That with that information have helped us to do that for almost 4 years now. We have been able to do that. The other accomplishments of that, several reports, some from the ACLU. Also have put a lot of information from that documentation that we have. The 2 lawsuits that have been filed already against Cobb County has been a result of these cases that we have been documented. At the same time, with the also the Southern Poverty Law Center in that research part, have allow us to go beyond just to receive the information and make our own reports or look for cases so we can have lawsuits. But the main problem is that our community do not want to come forward, and that's the biggest deterrent on this.
Well, and I mean, I agree. I mean, the problem we have when I ask because there actually is a formal complaint procedure under secure communities, but the problem is when I ask my clients if they want if they're willing to file a complaint, they always say, well, will it help my case? And my answer is no, because the complaint procedure isn't going to get you out of deportation proceedings. That's a prosecutorial discretion issue. So without prosecutorial discretion, the complaint procedure is meaningless. And again, keep in mind, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, but the overwhelming majority of people who are in deportation proceedings do not have an attorney. So why are you going to file a complaint under secure communities if you're just going to get deported anyway and the complaint is basically meaningless?
There's a question back there, Daniel.
Rather than a question, just a general comment on a lot of this last discussion. Remember the role of the consulates and remember international law. People should not be sent from the county twice to Mexico without having an interview with somebody that would tell them their rights, because that's what consular notification and consular access is all about, and it is in the Vienna Convention, which is law for the United States. Basically, immigrants detained should have the right to communicate with their consulate, have the consulate visit them and advise them on all of their rights as a foreign national. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. We have probably the widest, no, definitely the widest presence, consular presence in the U.S., and certainly Mexico will do that. I don't know about, I can't respond for other countries, but certainly we will do it, and I'm concerned that this discussion is going on as if that possibility wasn't available or isn't available when it is, and it functions constantly. We do have some difficulty sometimes having access to the people because of the way they're being moved around by ICE quite quickly before a consular interview can happen, but nonetheless, generally we have that access. The other comment is, generally it seems like we're having a meeting here among people of obviously single-minded views, and I am concerned when I heard yesterday and I hear today from DHS officials the word of, well, the majority of public opinion wants, well, the Americans desire, well, we have to have enforcement because that's what they're where are the people here that are demanding this coming from civil society itself? Where are the citizens that are making this demand? And why isn't there an engagement of a discussion and a debate among the different opinions within the society, not only vis-a-vis the officials or governmental officials, so that all of these issues can move forward? Otherwise, it seems to be two sets of circular discussions in two different fora that don't lead the whole to any one single place. So perhaps something to think about in the future is how to engage each other in a little less passionate and hopefully a little more objective dialogue on what it is that we want for our immigrant communities.
I mean, if I could just respond to that. I mean, I think the problem is that the empirical data never catches up to the political cycle. And so by the time, you have the evidence, the policies are already put in place, which have then in turn reinforced the very political dynamic that you're trying to counteract. And let's not forget, and I think it's a sobering reminder that we need to sort of understand the political dynamics that are going into some of these policy changes. You're living in a country that saw in the last presidential election a birther movement, which very much would have put the President of the United States through the Secure Communities Program. Where was his papers? And so, President Obama is, I think, reacting to that political environment. Until we change that political environment, we're going to be sitting among ourselves lamenting that environment. And indeed, I think that's why it was so troubling yesterday to hear David Martin say that some of these enforcement initiatives were done as a predicate for legalization. Because to me, criminalization and legalization are mutually exclusive concepts. The mood of the country either moves toward the idea of treating undocumented immigrants as worthy of punishment and as criminals and as others and as dangerous, or it moves in the direction of, no, you deserve political equality and legalization and the right to stay here. And so I think it's quite right to ask about how we can change the political dynamic. And I also think it's quite right what Marty says, which what can we do given the fact that CIR is no longer possible, certainly within the next 2 years. What can we do on a one-on-one basis? Which is why I really want to recognize the actions that were taken by Maria Bolanos earlier today. I mean, talk about a creative action and an environment where most people really are afraid of coming forward and potentially prejudicing their own case to shift the balance of power. And it created a dilemma that you could feel in this room. And it certainly created a dilemma for David Venturella, but I think we're going to need to see, following the courageous actions of DREAM Act students, for example, who are committing acts of civil disobedience and prejudicing their own cases, as a means of changing the political equation. We're going to need to see more of that and more circumstances where people like Maria come into these kinds of spaces, and when having the opportunity to interact and confront David, doing so. And that's, I think, unfortunately, the only way that we're going to make progress, because, I mean, we aren't operating in a political vacuum. We are going to see an explosion of state laws that either explicitly or implicitly will increase the criminalization that leads to a trigger of these programs, which is why, frankly, we have to confront, I think, some of the lies that have been proffered by this administration. I mean, for John Morton to go to community stakeholder meeting after community stakeholder meeting and say that the program, when he was originally selling it, that it solves racial profiling, not just that it doesn't lead to, but he literally was saying it solves racial profiling by taking things out of the hands of state officials, it's just a lie. I mean, John Morton is a very smart person. And he understands full well that the racial profiling doesn't occur at the point of fingerprinting. It operates at the point of the interaction with police coming in. And so it's just clearly a misrepresentation. We need to confront those. And I think that's quite right to point that out.
If I could, yes. In response to that as well, it's more than just, because we've had the actions in Florida as well. We've had the Trail of Dreams, which were the 4 young people that walked from Miami to Washington, D.C., brought attention to the situation of the Kids with DREAM Act and others. The Fast for Our Families has started at the same time. where people who had, some of the people I mentioned earlier today, who had entered a church and began an indefinite fast to bring attention to the separation of families. The actions are happening, but it goes back to something else. It goes back to that really excellent marketing strategy about secure communities. Because while it is a little bit like preaching to the choir in this room, that's without question, but the reality is that a lot of people don't understand what's wrong with secure communities. They don't know the stories that we know. They don't understand. And when we one-on-one talk with them, they get it. They're like, that's horrible. Well, no, not my own mother. I've gone through well, not them, Jeanette. And then I tell another story. Well, no, I didn't mean them. And then she starts to realize the not thems are the majority of people, but that most people don't hear these stories. And I tend to think a lot of what we're doing over the next 2 years is a great deal of education everywhere, within schools, within our organizations, within various congregations, because I know very, very good people that think, well, secure communities is good because that's about criminals. But when I tell them the reality of the mother that goes to the store for milk, then they're like, well, that's horrible. I didn't know that. And so I know they're out there. I don't believe that we're a nation that thinks that this is okay, that we threaten 7-year-old U.S. citizen children. I don't think that that's okay, that we separate families and mothers that are breastfeeding from their children. I don't believe that. I do, so I don't think it's that we're not trying to engage that other aspect of civil society or have those conversations happening. We're a very large country with a lot of people, and it takes a lot of people having that conversation to take it to that next level.
If I can add to that, I think one of the things that we really have to do is make this really clear that this is not just the Latino issue. I had an opportunity to give 2 talks a few months back in the same week. One at a Latino church in Apex, North Carolina, and one at a mosque in Zebulon, North Carolina. And the question that the people in the mosque most wanted to ask me was, how come it's only the Arab American population that's being profiled? And of course, when I went to the Latino church, people said, well, how come it's only Latinos that are being profiled? So we have to make it really clear that this is a broader immigrant issue. And it's not just an issue of immigrant rights either. It's a basic social justice and human rights issue. So the more we can reach out to unconventional, potential allies, like prosecuting attorneys. This messes up the criminal court system, like defense attorneys. I should be a little bit careful since this is being webcast, but I had an opportunity to give a CLE on secure communities out in Asheville, North Carolina. Continuing legal education seminar. Lawyers are required by law in in every state to maintain a certain number of continuing legal education credits per year in order to keep their bar license. And someone decided to plan this CLE in Asheville, North Carolina, which is up in the mountains at peak leaf color weekend. So not a whole lot of people actually went to the classes they signed up for. I probably shouldn't be saying that. But just by happenstance, only one person ended up coming to the CLE I was doing on secure communities. And he was very honest and very kind. And he said, I have to be honest with you, I have no idea what secure communities is. But I had to be in the workshop before this in this room, and I'm teaching the workshop after your workshop in this room, and I didn't want to move my stuff. But it turned out to be the most productive CLE I've ever taught, because he was the head of the auto torts section. So in a 1 hour long one-on-one CLE, I convinced him that secure communities was something that affected him, that affected his practice, that affected his clients, and affected the auto tort section. And I posed several hypotheticals. I said, look, what happens if you have a major, personal injury case, and the person who ran into your client, ends up being in Mexico before they have their hearing? Doesn't that adversely affect your client's ability to have their day in court? Or what if the person who is undocumented is your client? What happens if they get a drunk driver slams into them, and before they have their day in court, they're deported. So we really have to broaden out the dialogue to include people that we're not currently talking to.
So other than cloning Marty, I'd love to hear some of the other strategies that you have. We have one here, and then Margaret over here.
Martin Vega from Voces Mesoamericanas. I guess the one comment I would have from the beginning comment was I don't think that in the case of ICE and DHS, there are limited budgets and limited resources. And, you know, I looked at the budget, and it's interesting to note that in fiscal year 06, okay, the CPB ICE budget was $12.2 billion, and that's gone up 40% to $17 billion for fiscal year 2011. So just to note that.
And that's what they claim, though, that they have limited budget.
Right, right. Yeah. And I think the second point that I would make is that in part of the research that I've done, I think one of the most fascinating things I came across was this concept that DHS has. It's called the criminal fugitive life cycle. And the reason this is germane to this discussion is because, you know, we've only looked at today at 287 and secure communities. But really, as we saw yesterday, there's a multitude of programs. And so what I would like to bring to the table is that conceptually, the way that they look at the life cycle is identification, arrest, detention, prosecution, and deportation. Okay, because really that's the magnitude of the comprehensive strategy that we're facing. You know, and so I guess what I would say is that, you know, for example, you know, all the invitees here are just from certain parts of the country, but I could tell you that secure communities the implementation of secure communities was along the border. You know, and so there's nobody from the border here. You know, so I guess even to the question, oh, are you? Okay, I'm sorry. But I guess the question that I would say is that really we still need to have a conversation among ourselves about the strategy. For example, we've not talked about the impact of the changes that have just gone on with the elections, and given the fact that there might not be reform, what we need to do in the short term and long term. You know, I'm from Nicaragua, and I tell you, during the 80s, you know, there was a euphemism that the United States was conducting low-intensity warfare against Nicaragua. But I could tell you, from the standpoint of the Nicaraguans that were dying, it was high-intensity conflict. So I guess what I'm saying is, you know, if we look at the families day in and day out that are being broken by the deportations, you know, that's something I think that we have to contend with. The last thing I would make is that I guess, you know, you talked about Latinos, we talked about Arabs, but one of the emerging trends is that the increasing number of indigenous migrants from the south of Mexico and from Guatemala. I was in an immigration conference in September, and when we were at the conference, there was news that in Lake Worth, Florida, there had been a raid by ICE that morning against the indigenous peoples. And even though the Mayans had received workshops in not to open the door, not to talk to them, because of the fear factor that they came in, you know, they were arrested en masse. So I guess the question is, you know, maybe this would be interesting, is beyond also just the Latinos, you know, what are the issues around indigenous peoples that come from the region that don't speak Spanish, that don't speak English, you know, and that might be living in your communities as well? And that's more of a general question.
Why don't we, I'm looking at the time, why don't we take a couple more comments and questions, and then everybody on the panel can respond. So I think we had Margaret next, and then Lena, and then here.
Hi, thanks to all the panelists. I'm Margaret Huang with the Rights Working Group. My question is, in the recent meeting that ICE had with the Arlington County staff, they indicated to the county staff that they actually consider detainers to be a request, not mandatory. And so one of the things the Arlington Coalition is now considering is how do we respond to that and how do we take that on? And I wanted to ask if any of the other jurisdictions in the room have had any success with upholding detainers for anyone who is arrested for minor misdemeanors or things that don't fall into Tier 1 priorities, and sort of what other strategies might have been tried there. Thanks.
My name is Edgar Aranda. I am the chair of the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. I work with the Legal Aid Justice Center as well. Well, it's a comment about coalition building. What the compañero is saying, I think we already are working at the grassroots levels, organizing a lot nationally. So also I want to recognize here Sarai Uribe, who was also a member of the Arlington Coalition, as well Endelon and Esteban. I am sure he is watching us, and if he is still there. But so the thing is, I would like to, if you can talk a little bit, Chris, about the truth campaign that you have, so in the national level, so how the frontline states are working. Okay.
And then back
Lena Graber with the National Immigration Forum, and this is more of a comment, but feel free to respond. I just wanted to highlight something that I think is often missing in this conversation and in these conversations at large. Secure communities and 287G get a ton of attention, but a year ago, a report came out from ICE itself that said that more than half of all the immigrants that they apprehend come through the criminal alien program, which gets less attention because it's been around longer and it's so ingrained, but that's actually the largest metric for how local law enforcement agencies interact with ICE and how, and it's the most subject to racial profiling because it's ultimately about ICE agents going around the jail and deciding who they want to interview that they think might not be here legally. And furthermore, it's not even, I lost my train of thought. That was mainly what I wanted to bring attention to.
Go ahead.
Sort of on cue. My name is Vicki Galbeca. I'm from the ACLU of New Mexico Regional Center for Border Rights in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And this is I want to sort of add on to the comments that have already been mentioned about the secure communities and 287Gs not being the only program, but I also wanted to share something with you that I thought was very interesting and hasn't actually been brought up. But when we first heard about secure communities in New Mexico, it had been rolled out in 5 counties. So we sent a public records request thinking that would be a fast way to get the data. We sent a public records request to these counties that they are crafted with DHS or vice versa. It doesn't matter who's doing the agreement or who's initiating it. The fact is federal immigration law something that is purely in the province of federal government, or are local law enforcement officials going to be allowed? Because another thing that we see in New Mexico, we only have a 287G with a Department of Corrections. We don't, so it's a jail model. It's not a street model. Yet we have many communities where sheriffs take out of their own initiative, decide to ask about immigration law. And so we have actually had to go to several local communities throughout southern New Mexico where we're trying to explain to local law enforcement officials that it's not their job to enforce federal immigration law. And yet Border Patrol is perfectly happy that they're collaborating with them without a formal agreement. So that's just my commentary.
Thanks. So we only have a couple minutes left. We have on the list here detainers, the Truth Campaign, criminal alien program, the rollout of the program, and is a program even necessary? Should we go down the line? Does everybody want to make a comment?
I think Marty's probably good on the detainer.
Right.
On the detainer issue, and actually I forgot the happy ending to the story of the guy from Venezuela who was picked up. In addition to the immigration work I do in the courts, I'm also on the Orange County Human Rights and Human Relations Commission. And I was the person from the commission who was responsible for negotiating with the sheriff around secure communities. So what happened in this case was really interesting because I went up to the jail and I went to the sheriff and said, look, this seems to me to be inconsistent with your understanding with ICE about what secure communities is supposed to do. And he, called up the sergeant and said, is it true that this kid was just picked up for resisting and obstructing? And the sergeant said yes. And he says, is it true that there was no, physical resistance, that he was just refusing to give his name? And the sergeant said yes. And he says, is it true that the family has already paid the $200 bond that was set by the magistrate? And the sergeant said yes. And he said, well, in that case, I'm ordering you to let him go. We have no basis to hold him. So he basically just ignored the detainer. Because I said to him, I said, look, the detainer's not mandatory. The detainer doesn't say you have to hold him. It's a request. And I definitely think that that's a strategy that we have to work on expanding, particularly in jurisdictions like Arlington and others where there's a lot of sympathy to trying to opt out because local law enforcement can, in fact, ignore the detainer.
I just want to thank Mr. Vega for mentioning the indigenous populations. We might not have a big presence in this metropolitan area, but in other parts of the states, there are a large presence, and we need to be aware of that. In the coalition building, it's happening. I think we have the best example in Arlington. We were able to build this large coalition that work directly with the government, the local government, to put this, to look for this opt-out. We're trying, believe me, we're trying, and we will continue trying with others to continue in this coalition building in other parts of the states in order to I cannot find any other word, defend our immigrant community better to what is coming, particularly in Virginia. Not only all of this, but all the bills that are being introduced right now, probably as we're speaking, in terms of making things harder and harder and harder. There is a bill right now out there, just in case there's an opt-out mechanism, a bill to continue and making even more stringent this fingerprinting of undocumented, and we don't know what we're going to do with all of that. We're working hard. We're building the coalition. But we also know that we don't have the political will now to change many of these things. So we'll continue working, and we always welcome the advice of any others. And I'm sure here my colleagues will be glad to talk to any of you and how to build your own coalition to try to opt out if there is one. I'm still thinking there is, since I didn't hear what he said this morning. So I'm still thinking there is one. Thank you.
I mean, I guess the points that I would reinforce are the extent to which politics are driving these new revolutionary policies, and to the extent to which the politics are being driven by fear. And we've seen that the 287G program, I mean, if we were to do the origins of it, I mean, it came after 9/11. And the first MOA was signed in Florida because that's where the pilots apparently could have been stopped if we had just connected the dots. And we saw after 9/11 the extent to which, when the country is afraid, we're willing to sacrifice rights to feel more secure. And that paradigm is amplified when it's not your own rights that are being sacrificed. And so it's it's very easy for Steve King, the incoming head of the Immigration Subcommittee in the House, to basically say racial profiling is going to be an acceptable consequence if we're going to get our borders secure. And that's exactly what he said during the last Judiciary Committee hearing on 287G, and you can see it. And so, I mean, we have to, I think, confront that sort of sobering political environment with bolder actions that don't just take place at the margins in conversations like that happen here, but happen at the level in Arlington and in North Carolina with creative strategies that are being undertaken. And now, briefly, the Uncover the Truth campaign, which was started a while back when we saw how quickly things were moving, and when we heard through the media that Secure Communities was supposed to be deployed nationwide by 2013, and very few people had even heard of the program. We decided to undertake a campaign that used advocacy through inquiry, thus the title Uncover the Truth, because a lot of the local jurisdictions where it had been deployed had not even heard of it. Sheriff Baca in Los Angeles, supposed to be a flagship location, hadn't heard of it, and Los Angeles was already on. And so we've used gentle advocacy or gentle inquiry at the local level to drive advocacy, and we're trying to import opposition to the 287G program into the Secure Communities context. There's a lot of information about the website in terms of how it works, but it also is driven from an acknowledgement that we don't have the political power in this town necessary to change these programs right now. And that's just a self-evident fact. It's not an opinion. We don't have the political power necessary to alter the trajectory of these programs, and the only way we're going to gain that strength is through the local level. And through people who earn their legalization by fighting their criminalization. And that's, I think, again, how things are going to go going forward. And that's the idea driving behind the frontline state strategy. There was a conference in New Orleans earlier this year of local organizations that were doing organizing, actual organizing, resisting local enforcement, and how we could share tactics in a way, again, that would shift the power dynamic locally as a means of winning legalization from the bottom up, and creative actions like one I'll share with you from earlier this week. In New Orleans, the New Orleans Worker Center for Racial Justice has a phenomenal attorney, J.J. Rosenbaum, who they have a committee that operates in New Orleans, a workers' committee that operates within the local jails. So they're hearing stories from people who are incarcerated and communicating that information out. They had heard a story of a guy who had gone through his entire conviction process. He had been held for weeks on an expired detainer waiting to be removed for ICE. And they went and did a combined organizing effort in the public and filed a writ of habeas corpus and demanded that the sheriff produce the individual, and the detainer had been expired. And there was no authority to hold this person, and that's the kind of strategy, bold strategy, I think that we're going to have to undertake. And yeah, I guess that's we're not going to. I don't think we're going to get anywhere just merely sort of lamenting the program. We have to actually, I think, figure out local models. Much, I think, like those that Marty describes, that can change the dynamics.
And about the indigenous group, I think that we need to put several elements on consideration when we talk about indigenous communities. And just to touch bases and remind that the Southeast, the immigrants in the Southeast are new immigrants. Therefore, we haven't been long enough is this one important part. But the other part of this is that most of the time the help and the support that groups called indigenous groups are mixing to the who is Mexicano and who is Guatemalteco. It doesn't matter if they are from Chiapas or from Oaxaca or from La Sierra in Guatemala, in El Petén. But I think that the most important part is that we are going to be able to recognize the indigenous communities when they have organized and they have found their own identity and they are claiming their identity. And what I mean by that, if I am a person from I don't know, from the Maya origin, I need to recognize my identity, so I claim it, and then I can be recognized as the indigenous. At this time, in the process of time, we have very few groups, at least in Georgia, in other parts in southeast of the United States, recognized as an indigenous group, Mayas or Quiches or other kind of groups that are out there. I just wanted to put that consideration. It's, for example, when someone asks me, where is the Latino gay community, and how many gays, or how the lesbian community has been arrested. At this time, for us, it's like Mexicanos, Guatemaltecos, we are not able to recognize or to identify sexual preference or in particular also specific identities as a social actors. And this is something that we are, it's because we are kind of new and in integrating ourselves as a groups and with a new identities in this new society.
I would do that in 2 minutes. This is always what happens when you're last. I was just going to stress that I think that the things that have been mentioned earlier, those pressure points and the creative solutions are important. And I think reflecting on a visit we had in South Florida with the representative of the West Wing recently, it was pre-election, she made it very clear that the current administration would do what the laws currently were, and that was it. We could continue to do deferred deportation and actions on an individual basis, but there would be no blanket moratorium. That was just not going to happen because the impression, right or wrong, was that the public's will was not behind it, which we've already discussed. So I think that education is important. I think finding those pressure points, whether it's the detainers, I think an interesting conversation I had at lunch, we talked in the morning session, really the detainers themselves. I mean, we really need to hold ICE up to a standard that you say you have certain priorities. You have the option of who you issue this detainer for or not. So simply don't do it when it's the victim of domestic violence. So I think those are those pressure points as well.
Did you want another one?
That's fine.
Okay. I don't have another. Well, thanks to all the panelists. I think it's easy to get depressed about all of these issues, but we also have to recognize that there's some fantastic advocacy taking place across the country. So I'm grateful for the work of everybody here. Why don't we give our panelists a round of applause?
Yeah, I'm going to put this back up. Thank you all. I'm going to turn the podium over to the project director, who will give us some closing remarks, hopefully following yours on a slightly upbeat note.
Okay, I know it's been a long day, and it's been a very productive day. So my name is Manuel Vasquez. I'm a religion professor at the University of Florida, where I'm also an affiliate of the Center for Latin American Studies, and a project co-director. How do you end something like this? It's very hard since so many ideas have been offered. Especially in the morning, it was a very intense session. I guess you start by thanking first the Woodrow Wilson Center for hosting us, for the hospitality. It's wonderful to have that kind of collaboration, and we certainly look forward to having future collaborations with them. Also thanking the panelists and who came in, some local talent that we drew from, and also the people who came from other parts of the country to tell us about their story. And finally, you who attended, who considered this issue a very important issue. And so I'm thankful for all of that. This was an experiment. We basically are thinking at the University of Florida with some funding from the Ford Foundation of starting an institute on immigration, religion, and social change. And so we are trying to experiment with what kind of models we could use in terms of being effective, and what are the issues that I think we should be taking up. And so we thought that the issue of 287Gs and secure communities was an issue that was important. And the question was, how do we then bring a diverse set of voices to the conversation? And so I take Daniel Hernandez-Joseph's comments very seriously, that we don't want to have two sets of circular discussions, as he called them. So we made a very concerted effort to include voices from other parts of the civil society. But unfortunately, those voices seem a little reticent to engage in a kind of conversation, because for those voices, there's nothing much to discuss. So I think in the future, we're going to have to try to develop networks and the kind of trust that allows us to bring other sectors of the society into the conversation, because we don't want to be preaching to the choir. Another word also about the focus, the regional focus. Part of the way in which we focused on the communities that we focus is because we feel that a lot of stuff has been done on the border, and a lot of stuff has been done on traditional destinations, but not a lot of new destinations. And we feel that immigrants are particularly vulnerable in those new destinations. And so there's a necessity to really address their condition. And that's why we are focusing our institute, being located at the University of Florida, north of Miami. When we always mention the University of Florida, people think of Miami, but we're in Gainesville, which is actually the south. We are interested in being a center that would be a resource to that particular region. And so that's one of the reasons why we chose the South as a region of focus. But we're aware that the issues are national, and that the issues are not only national, but they include the transnational dimension, that enforcement is not just a national problem or a national situation, but that it carries into transnational dimensions. And finally, yes, we agree that there are all sorts of laws that go beyond 287Gs and secure communities, and that we need to ask broader questions. We felt that having 287Gs and secure communities would be a good entry point to have these questions. All right, so what have we learned from the conversation today? It seems to me that what we have learned and what I take out, I've been taking notes because I've been trying to see what, learning about the experience. And I would, I will welcome comments after my comments. If you have any comments about how to organize events and go beyond, I'm really all ears. But I've been looking at then, what's the lesson to learn here? The lesson to learn here is precisely this idea that enforcement on its own is not the answer. That it seems to me that assuming that enforcement can solve the problem of undocumented immigration is not only naive, but I think it's also, it's a failure to understand really the full reality of the situation, or perhaps a willful failure to understand that reality. It seems to me that what this panel has shown is that there are complex effects at the local and state level of immigration enforcement in various forms, and that we need to be very aware of those effects, and that we don't know the full extent of the effects. Although some of the people here were telling the same stories, these stories have not gotten out. I think we need to do a better job at showing the human face, the micro effect of these policies. Because when you get to talk to people, when you talk face to face with people, when you reach the public and you show the actual effect and you put a human face to what's going on, not to the faceless immigrant or undocumented hordes that are invading the country, we then get a different reaction. So it seems to me that going into what have I learned and what is it that the Institute should be thinking about, as we go forward thinking about the Institute, we need to start thinking about how to demand accountability, how to demand transparency, how to demand information. It seems to me that these three issues are central to the formation of an institute, that an institute should be there to demand transparency, to demand accountability, to demand rigor in the information that we're provided, so that people can make decisions based on this, so that people can create strategies, so that people can evaluate whether these policies are working or not and the effects of these policies. It seems to me that this is central to have this information, particularly in new destinations, where I think communities all of a sudden see an influx of immigrants, and they are not prepared to deal with those immigrants. They see immigrants in their schools, they see immigrants coming to their hospitals, and then all of a sudden they have no metaphors to make sense of that movement of people. So it seems to me that the work of an institute, educating people on the ground in communities that are experiencing these kinds of transformations, demographic changes, changes in diversity, is central. So I am left with the idea of transparency, accountability, and information as central pieces for what the Institute will have to do in such a way that we learn to think beyond the short term, so that when we hear communities taking charge or taking local charge, as Monica Barzani's book is titled, we say, okay, well, maybe short term you're going to be addressing the problem, but what are the long-term solutions? What are the long-term effects of the laws that you're passing? I think that's what the Institute should be all about. And I think the Institute should hold those, not just to the technical questions of what the laws do specifically, questions of human rights and things like that, but I think they should go to the values of this country, values that have to do with diversity, inclusiveness, pluralism. These values are values that I think should be core as the Institute goes ahead and as we continue to have conversations such as the conversation that we're having here. But it's not just a question of being vigilant. I think a role of an Institute of Religion and Social Change that I take from this meeting should also be an institute that highlights the positive, highlights also that there are a myriad of experiences out there that are trying to integrate immigrants, both documented and undocumented, and that those experiences are experiences that haven't received a lot of media attention, because most of the media attention is focused on the enforcement side. But we have seen communities from San Francisco to Jupiter, Florida, where we have done our own research, communities attempting to address the issues, the tensions, the contradictions of immigrations, the human plight of immigration in positive ways, through worker centers, through community resource centers, through passing fair wage laws that affect not just immigrants, but also affect native-born, because what we have here is an issue of the quality of life, the quality of our communities. And after all, our communities are what make our civil society vibrant. So I think we're also charged at the Institute, in bringing up these positive examples that are there. I think Monica Barsani's volume talks about 68 different initiatives that are out there that are what she calls integrative initiatives that haven't been talked about. And I know that it's hard not to focus on the negative and on the difficulties, but I think it's also good to focus on the positive things that are taking place there. So I think that's what I take from the meeting. And as I say, this is just one step in the conversation. I'm hoping that we will continue this conversation in different venues, perhaps not just here in Washington. We want to take this conversation somewhere else, to communities in the South, where we can organize perhaps around issues of detention, which is an issue that has been mentioned as a potential issue for another forum. What's going on with detention centers, the whole economy and politics of detention centers, the effect that they have on communities, the separation of families. There are a lot of issues that we have left untouched here, and I'm just hoping that this is just the beginning of a long conversation. And as I say, I pledge to you that if we go ahead with this institute, that we will try to include as many voices as possible. But I'm happy with, I think, the first step that we've taken. So thank you very much.